Hello, Sunshine.
Good morning.
It's Mrs. Klein.
And Mr. Creighton, we are here with your second podcast of the Chinese unit, lesson 21 on page 287. This lesson is titled Chinese Discoveries and Innovations. The guiding question that will help you guys throughout this unit, how have medieval Chinese discoveries and inventions influenced the modern world?
All right, you guys, there's vocabulary as well. It's kind of on the light side this time, but there's 4 vocabulary terms you need to know. They're gunpowder, inoculate, mass produce, and movable type.
All right, guys, so looking at the introduction, between about 200 and 1400 CE, the Chinese made many discoveries and inventions. Many of these advances occurred during the Tang and Sung dynasties, and the influence of these advancements is still evident today.
Over the centuries, Chinese scholars and scientists studied engineering, mathematics, science, and medicine, among other subjects. Their studies led to scientific and technological progress that was often far ahead of advances in the rest of the world.
All right, guys. Section 1, Exploration and Travel. Excuse me. Several Chinese inventions made exploration and travel safer and faster. The Chinese developed the first compass as early as the 3rd century BCE. The first Chinese compasses were pieces of magnetic mineral called lodestone.
Eventually, the Chinese replaced the lodestone with a steel needle because they learned that rubbing a needle with lodestone made the needle act in the same way as the lodestone, and a needle in a compass gave a more accurate reading than a piece of lodestone.
By the time of the Sung dynasty, the Chinese were using magnetic compasses for navigation at sea. Additionally, the Chinese made sea travel safer by improving boat construction. By the 2nd century CE, they started building ships with separate watertight compartments.
And now modern shipbuilders actually still use this technique today, you guys. All right, so they also made travel on rivers, lakes, and canals a little bit easier. Within China, people often traveled by boat on rivers or across lakes. An innovation of a vessel called a paddle wheel boat made this type of travel much faster.
The people-powered paddle wheel boats allowed the Chinese to travel much faster on rivers and lakes, and were also much easier to maneuver than any other type of watercraft.
Another way the Chinese improved transportation was by developing a new type of canal lock during the Sung dynasty. The Chinese used canals extensively to connect their mini rivers.
The Chinese also found ways to improve bridges. The new Chinese bridge used arches that were a smaller part or segment of a circle, making the bridges broader and flatter than semicircle arches could.
You got it.
Many cultures developed engineering technologies. However, the segmental arch bridge is one of China's most prized achievements.
All right, moving on to industry. Some Chinese advances led to new industries, you guys. By the 2nd century CE, the Chinese invented the art of paper making, and paper making became an important industry in China.
All right, looking at printing now. The invention of paper made another key development possible: printing. The printer first drew characters, symbols, on paper and then glued the paper to a wooden block. When the glue was dry, the printer carved out the wood around the characters, leaving the characters raised on the wood.
All right, in the 11th century, during the Sung dynasty, the Chinese invented movable type, which consists of separate blocks for each character. Europeans developed movable type independently in the 1400s. Printers made their type by carving characters out of clay and baking them. To print, they selected the characters they needed and placed them in an iron frame in the order they would appear on the page.
Until the last century, all newspapers, books, and magazines were printed using movable type.
All right, now moving on, you guys, to tea. Historians have discovered from written accounts that the Chinese have been drinking tea since at least 2700 BCE. That's a heck of a long time ago, Mr. Creighton.
Very long time ago. However, by the 8th century CE, tea had become a hugely popular everyday beverage that was enjoyed throughout China.
During the Tang dynasty, the first tea plant seeds were brought to Japan, where tea cultivation developed into an industry by about 1200. Europeans became involved in tea farming and trade by the 18th century.
Today, tea is one of the most popular beverages in the world, and as in ancient China, people now often drink tea for their health.
All right. Another Chinese invention is a type of fine pottery called porcelain. Some historians believe that the Chinese produced the first porcelain as early as the 1st century CE.
Porcelain making became a major industry in China. Hundreds of thousands of people worked to mass produce dishes, bowls, and vases. Chinese porcelain became a prized item for trade, and we tend to think of porcelain today as China too, because of where it originated from.
Interchangeable words there.
Yep.
All right, the Chinese first made steel, a very useful metal, before 200 BCE. Steel is made from iron, but it is less brittle than iron and easier to bend into different shapes.
The Chinese were the first to learn how to make cast iron by melting and molding iron ore. Later, they learned that blowing air into the molten or melted cast iron causes a chemical reaction that creates steel, which is a great deal stronger than iron. Today, iron and steel making are among China's most important industries.
All right, now we're going to talk about military technology. During the Sung and the Mongol periods, the Chinese developed powerful weapons. The invention of gunpowder, one of the most significant inventions in all of history, made these weapons possible.
The Chinese who first made gunpowder were alchemists, people who practiced a blend of science and magic known as alchemy.
In 850 CE, during the Tang Dynasty, alchemists recorded a formula for gunpowder, but warned others to avoid it because it was extremely dangerous.
By the 10th century, the Chinese had developed the first weapon that used gunpowder, the flamethrower. That's pretty awesome.
It is. By the early 1300s, travelers had brought the knowledge of gunpowder to Europe.
Now let's keep going with rocket technology. Rocket technology was developed in China during the Sung Dynasty. By 1300, rockets had spread through much of Asia into Europe.
All right, now some everyday objects. Do you ever play games with a deck of cards? Like, I play solitaire like crazy, so I'm definitely like a card playing fool. If so, then you are using a Chinese invention, you guys.
What? All right, game cards and paper money. Game cards were invented in China in about the 9th century. Today, card games are played throughout the world. The Chinese invented paper money in the late 8th or early 9th century. Before that time, coins were the only form of currency. Paper money is the most common form of currency in the world today.
Yeah, guys, think about it. Walking around with a whole bunch of change in your pocket, it's like that's pretty heavy, and you kind of let people know you're coming as you're walking through the forest and you're a target to get robbed. So paper money.
Or even if you're going across the Trans-Saharan trade, like we talked about,
Exactly.
It's going to be a long way to go with a lot of weight.
All right. In addition to another everyday object was the development of the mechanical clock. The Chinese developed the first mechanical clock in about the 8th century.
The Chinese improved the mechanical clock in 1092 during the Sung Dynasty. Europeans first developed mechanical clocks in the late 1200s. Modern-day mechanical clocks are based on the same fundamental principles as early Chinese clocks.
All right, now moving into something that's really timely to this day. We're going to learn a little bit about the innovations the Chinese made in disease prevention. Chinese knowledge of medicine and disease prevention dates to ancient times. When an individual died from an infectious disease, the Chinese burned a chemical that released a poisonous smoke that they believed would destroy whatever was causing the illness.
The poisonous smoke used by Chinese was a type of disinfectant. A Chinese monk recommended steaming the clothes of sick people because he believed that the steam would prevent others from becoming ill. The idea was sound because hot temperatures kill many germs.
Sometime around the 10th century, the Chinese discovered how to inoculate people against smallpox, a dreaded infectious disease.
Chinese knowledge about smallpox inoculation eventually led to the development of drugs called vaccines. Modern medical professionals have developed vaccines for many diseases, including smallpox and the flu. All right, guys, looking at the lesson summary from what we've learned. In this lesson, you learned about Chinese inventions and discoveries between about 200 and 400 CE. 1400 CE. The influence of many of these advances spread far beyond China. Many Chinese inventions and discoveries continue to affect our lives today.
All right, exploration and travel. Several Chinese ideas improve travel and exploration. They include the magnetic compass, paddle wheel boats, canal locks, and segmental arch bridges.
Industry. Advances in papermaking and printing, including movable type, helped spread learning. Chinese porcelain became famous for its quality and beauty. The Chinese also discovered ways to make steel.
All right, military technology. The Chinese revolutionized military technology when they discovered how to use gunpowder to make powerful weapons. They also developed the first rockets.
Everyday objects. A number of Chinese inventions enriched people's everyday lives. Among them are game cards, paper money, and mechanical clocks.
All right, finally, disease prevention. The Chinese also made great strides in medicine and disease prevention since they discovered how to stop the spread of disease by using disinfectants and steam. Inoculations were used to protect individuals from catching smallpox.
All right, guys, going back to that essential question,
Oh my
or the
goodness.
guiding question, that is, how have medieval Chinese discoveries and inventions influenced the modern world?
And don't forget your vocab, you guys. Gunpowder, inoculate, mass produce, and movable type.
You.